Reflections on the Good News of Jesus Christ according to Matthew for the 14th Sunday of Ordinary Time. At that time, Jesus exclaimed, "I give praise to you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, for although you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, you have revealed them to little ones. Yes, Father, such has been your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son and anyone to whom the Son wishes to reveal him. Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves. For my yoke is easy, and my burden light." The good news of the Lord. Come to me, all you who are burdened. In these days of economic uncertainty, racial injustice, war in Ukraine, violence in our streets, are there any among us who does not feel burdened? Whether our burdens are personal, marital, familial, social, medical, economical, or political, they are all too real, as is our need for help. We may find ourselves feeling like Henry Kissinger when he was juggling numerous crises some years ago and was heard to say, "There cannot be a crisis next week. My schedule is already full." If only it were that easy. At least Jesus is offering us help if we are willing to receive it. The gospel today gives us some tips on how to do that. Jesus tells us that it is the learned and clever and powerful who don't get his message. It is the humble ones, the little ones, who do get it. Of course, in a society like ours, that is always telling us that the only way to go is up the ladder, become higher in status and in the eyes of others, humility is not a popular virtue. So, what are we to do with this statement of Jesus? Perhaps it might help if we unravel the true meaning of humility. It comes from the same word as humus, which, as any gardener knows, is the richest kind of soil. The word humus is also the root of two virtues. The virtue of humor, especially toward oneself, not taking myself too seriously. As one of the hidden Beatitudes puts it, "Blessed are those who can laugh at themselves, for they shall never cease to be amused." And of course, the virtue of humility, the earthy virtue, which has nothing to do with thinking that I am dirt, or that in order to be a good Christian, I have to let others walk all over me. No. Humility has to do with honesty. It means getting my feet on the ground, standing up straight, and looking myself honestly in the eye. Humility is knowing who I really am, my weaknesses, yes, but also my strengths, without pretense or game playing, which also helps me, at least occasionally, to laugh at myself. Humility and humor support one another, and both are strengthened if there is someone else in my life who can look me in the eye and remind me of my need for both humility and humor. Such a soul friend is a great blessing. One part of this self-awareness is knowing and accepting my limits, because they mark off my uniqueness, much as a fence marks off a pasture. A young colt will sometimes run around a pasture without hardly noticing it, because the colt is convinced that the grass really is greener on the other side of the fence and is trying to figure out how to get there. A more mature horse is inclined to be content with and even enjoy the pasture that is its own. It takes most of us many years and a good deal of maturing before we are able to know our uniqueness, our limits, and be content with that. But in that maturing, we become at least a bit humble. It's interesting that horses get there before we do. Maybe there is some virtue in being an old gray mare. Knowing and accepting our limits is no easy matter, especially in a society that calls us to be successful, unique, secure, perfect, and right. And we bring all of those calls into the spiritual realm, believing they will protect us from facing our dependence upon God, or from experiencing life as a mystery we can neither fathom nor control. Maybe that is why one of the most essential challenges we face is to accept our limits. When we do this, the opportunity for personal growth and development is almost limitless. As the poet E.E. Cummings wrote, "To be nobody but yourself in a world which is doing its best night and day to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle which any human being can fight, and never stop fighting." Another ingredient in this self-knowledge is acknowledging my abilities and talents. Because these are God's gifts to me, I cannot take any credit for them, but I should take ever more responsibility for them by searching for the ways in which God wants me to use my gifts and talents in building up the reign of God. By recognizing that my gifts are not for me, but are meant to be given away, I am growing in Christian maturity. And it is good to remember the wisdom of one of the early desert fathers, Abba Silvanus, who warned, "Woe to you whose reputation is greater than your talents." Humility, knowing honestly who I am, obviously includes knowing that I live in relation to God, that I am God's son or God's daughter, that I am dependent upon God. This foundational ingredient of humility frees me from always attempting to be in control, or thinking that I can or should be in control. Those are just more elements of cultural maturity. Because Christian maturity allows me to trust that God is really the one in control. Thinking that I must always be in control and trying to live that way will not only destroy my relationship with God, it will also destroy my relationships with spouse, family, friends, and others. Because trying to stay in control means trying to manipulate and control them as well, which is a great way to undermine relationships. Being humble allows me to accept not being in control. It also allows me to admit that I am not self-sufficient, that I need others, an admission which is a critical ingredient in marriage, family life, friendship, and spirituality. Perhaps it is becoming clear that humility is a move away from the isolation of self-sufficiency and toward the intimacy of interdependence. It is also a movement away from violence. Humility chooses not to take the road of violence, whether of word, deed, or attitude, because it is based on trusting God rather than trying to be self-sufficient. We resort to violence whenever we run out of patience. That's assuming there was any patience there in the first place, of course. while humility chooses patience over violence. We resort to violence when we feel threatened and weak. It is a rare person who can be calm and gentle while under attack. But humility, recognizing that strength comes from God rather than from self, chooses endurance over violence. If someone insults me, but I am honest enough, which is to say humble enough to know my strengths and weaknesses, I'm less likely to be threatened by the insult. I can accept whatever truth there is in it, and there may be some, and let the rest pass. Humility, then, is not weakness, but a form of strength. Humble people are strong enough not to need to be defensive or strike back or demand respect or prove their worth. They know that their real worth is based on being God's sons and daughters. And so they are free of pretense, illusion, and game playing. They are able to turn to God in prayer and accept the help Jesus offers all of us and discover that their yoke is a bit easier and their burden not quite so heavy after all. Because that's what Jesus offers us. His yoke is easy because he is at our side, pulling with us. A yoke teams two animals together so that together they can bear the burden. Believing that God has given us one another and that we can and must count on God and each other is the way to becoming more peaceful. Embracing our need for one another keeps us gentle of spirit. Life in the Spirit produces the kind of humility that says, I have much to learn. And that's a supremely hopeful statement at any age. Children in the ancient Middle East were seen in a very different way than children are today. They were the weakest and most vulnerable members of society, so vulnerable that the scholars teach us that about 30% died at birth or soon after. 30% of live births died by the age of 6. 60% did not live past their 16th birthday. They had little status within the community or family, and until the age of maturity, the child was considered equal to a slave. Like children, anyone whose powerlessness brings them to a realization of their dependence upon God, others, and all those who love them, well, such people have absorbed this message of Jesus. And such people, even in infancy, can help us discover the reign of God. First-time parents, for example, quickly realize that their best teachers in how to parent are their children. Their little ones help mom and dad realize the deep reservoir of love that they possess. Love that enables them to give and teach and care for these young lives God has entrusted to them. And the reign of God, in this way, becomes a bit more real. Or, if you want to fully experience a zoo, the circus, or just a walk in the woods, take a child. Kids can make everything from petting a lamb to watching a star shooting across the sky an amazing experience. Children see things with a sense of wonder and enthusiasm that reveals the joy in the simplest things and the beauty in what we old folks overlook or take for granted. Children and others whom society deems as little ones have an uncanny ability to get to the heart of the matter. They can ask questions that make you take a new look at what you thought was pretty clear and straightforward. They approach things with an honesty and simplicity that cuts through the rationalizations and justifications we adults devise. Authentic faith, then, is neither childish nor pretends the world is a perfect fairy tale where everyone lives happily ever after. Childlike faith is focused on people rather than things, seeks what is right and good above all other considerations, cuts through the complexities we invoke to justify our self-interest. We might well pray that the childlike people in our lives open our eyes to the signs of God's presence that we often overlook. Today's gospel invites us then to childlikeness and true humility. It's really much easier than preening for flattery, and lots freer than pretending we're brilliant. Thanks for listening.